Agile and Scrum teams often struggle with defect management for a number of reasons. When the defect is found, what do? Do you add it? Do you simply add it to the sprint backlog? What if adding it to the sprint backlog crashes the burn down chart? And because of this, we are unable to meet the sprint goal. What if instead adding the defect to the product backlog delays an important fix? Should you even estimate defects? How do you track defects? What about bugs? What about bugs? What do you do? How do you handle bugs in the team? So many questions, a lot of confusion, countless hours spent by multiple Agile teams across the world debating on all these questions. There's no right answer, but in this video I'll share all the scenarios, possible scenarios, all the options, and you can pick one. A solution that works for you. First, let's talk about bugs, which are issues found in the testing life cycle. If you find a bug in the sprint, during the sprint, concerning one of the increments that you're trying to build, one of the features, one of the user stories, something that you're building in the sprint, the team needs to answer a simple question. Can we release a working software, a working increment at the end of a sprint without fixing this bug? If you can't do that, if you need to fix this bug to release a working increment at the end of a sprint, it means that this bug needs to be fixed in priority, so you fix it now. The other scenario is simply replying yes to the previous question, meaning that we can release a working increment at the end of a sprint, even though the bug is still present. That's good, that's okay. The bug is not a priority, we understand that. We can handle that simply by creating this bug in the product backlog. You can even categorize this issue as a bug. But what about defects? Issues found in productions that are a deviation from the requirements, the initial requirements. What do you do about defects? Simple. I like treating them like the previous scenario. Simply create them in the product backlog as a user story. Some people create it as a user story. I prefer creating this issue, this defect, as a bug in the product backlog. Now, what do you do with all these defects and bugs that you created in the product backlog? How do you handle them in the sprint? Do you even estimate the work? That's the complex part of this video. Let's go through all the possible scenarios and possible solutions, and then you can pick one that works for you. Scenario 1. Dedicated time for bug fixing. Instead of estimating the effort that goes to fixing a bug beforehand, some teams prefer setting aside a time for bug fixing during the sprint. During the sprint planning, the team will decide on a number of, depending on how you estimate the work, but let's take as an example here, story points. So the team, let's say the team uses story points to estimate the work in the sprint. In the sprint planning, they will set aside a sort of bug fixing bucket of maybe 8 points that they will use during the sprint to work on the bugs. Each time during the sprint, when there's a priority bug to fix, to work on, they will take the effort required to fix this bug and subtract it from the issue fixing bucket until the issue fixing bucket is 0 or there's no longer priority bugs to fix. This doesn't always mean that they never estimate bugs though. Let's say something after investigation you realize that this bug is huge. It's gonna take a lot of effort to fix that. Then they might not treat it like a bug. They might treat it like a user story. Goes back in the product backlog, does the refinement, but more on this later. Number 2, using default estimations. Another way to handle bugs, estimate bugs, is to use a placeholder. I read that from one of the creators of Scrum, Jeff Sutherland. So basically, when you use a placeholder, you can be quite precise because research has shown, based on past data, evidence, that most bugs are fixed in a few hours. This data is also found in the book Code Complete, where they found that 80% of bugs are fixed in a day, within a day, in a few hours. That's pretty good, and you can be really precise if you want to use this approach. I would start with 0.5 as a placeholder in terms of days. So that's a few hours. Now, if you want to use story points, you can use story points. Put something like 4 or 2, depending. Just talk about that with the team and estimate it as you would estimate any user stories. Now that you have 0.5 or 2 or 4 in terms of story points, you can start using that to fix bugs as a placeholder. If you find that it's too little or too large, then you can talk about that in the sprint retrospective and refine this value until you find a really good placeholder that covers 80%, 85% of most bugs. You can even take that a step further. Start categorizing the bugs. Is it related to coding, a coding bug, a design bug, a business logic bug, a database bug? All these categories might have different placeholders, different values in terms of estimation. Well, it works pretty well. The more data you have, you can use this data to make more precise placeholders. The cool part with that is once you start using that for defects, for bugs, why not use that for user stories? Think about it. No longer estimating user stories, only using placeholders, because at the end of the day, there's not a lot of difference between a user story and a defect. Think about that. Scenario 3, no estimation. When fixing a bug, a defect, there's two things that you need to do. First, you need to investigate. You need to find what's the root cause of the issue. And once you've found that, you fix it by either changing code or changing anything. It doesn't matter. You change something and it's fixed. Two things that you need to do. Now, some people believe that you can't really estimate the effort that goes into fixing this bug, this defect, without investigating first. And investigating takes way longer, usually, than fixing the actual bug. The code change may take like a few seconds, but knowing where to change the code, knowing the root cause of an issue, might take days. So why waste time estimating this effort? Because you can't do it. You won't know how long it will take to estimate the work. So some people simply don't estimate it. Why waste time? Which of these scenarios and possible solutions do you like the most? With the teams I work with, I like suggesting scenario 4, handling the bug, the defect, the same way you would handle a user story. Keep it simple. You refine it the same way you would refine a user story. You estimate it the same way, and you take it in the sprint if it's a priority. If you look at it closely, a bug, a defect, and a user story, a lot of things in common. Some people say that it's hard to estimate the bug. It's hard to refine because you need to do this investigation work first. But what about spikes? What about spikes? A user story that's so complex that you can't get it to meet the definition of ready. So you need to do a spike so that you get more information, so that it can be refined, so that you know what to do. You do that for user stories, right? Why not do a spike to investigate the defects, the bugs? Same thing. And the more developers have knowledge on the code base, the easier it will be to estimate the work, because they know exactly what to do based on past data, based on experience, based on skills. And the more developers you have which have this knowledge on the code base, the more precise your estimation will be. Basically, the more data you have, the more precise your estimation would be. And I would argue that most of the defects and bugs, the developers will be able to estimate it if they have a good knowledge of a code base. Only a few exceptions will require investigation or a spike. And remember, estimations are relative to other items when you're estimating in story points. Ask yourself a question: the bug I'm trying to fix right now, do I have more information for this bug than I had previously for a previous bug, which was a 3-pointer in terms of story points? Yes? Maybe it's a 2-pointer. No? Maybe it's a 4-pointer. Relative. And it really doesn't matter, because the more you do it, the more data you have, the more the estimations will balance out. Same as for user stories. I like treating it simple. Defects, bugs, user stories are the same way, because at the end of the day, they are all bringing value to the customer. Keep it simple. Everything in the backlog has two values: negative value for things that are not done and positive value for things that are done. When treating defects, bugs, user stories differently, you're adding a lot of complexity, confusion to an already complex environment. And it's way easier to prioritize the product backlog, to know what to focus on in terms of value to the customer, when everything is treated the same way. Which brings me to my next point. If you want more tips, insights on Agile, Scrum, personal growth, click on the video that stands out the most on the screen right now, and I'll see you in a few seconds.